front of me. And so I'm going to start by doing a quick review. Maybe I'll leave. I don't think. I'm going to start by doing a quick review of 2021, and then I'll look at 2022, the outlook, the opportunities, and all I've been asked to do. But first of all, I must thank RCCG Christ Church and my pastor and Egbon, Pastor Remy Morgan, and my friends here. I seem to have a few of them, BC Adeyemi, Tomi Adepoju, and others, for inviting me. It's not my first time speaking in this auditorium in a context like this, and I consider it a privilege and a pleasure. So, talking about 2022 business outlook. So, like I said, I'll start with what was good about 2021. I didn't want to make the presentation very technical, such that you leave here feeling you just had a lot of data and maybe you're confused or afraid. So I'll start with what was good about 2021, and then what was not so good. And the reason I put the good and the not so good in inverted commas is that sometimes you find that in matters of the economy and policy, things may not be absolutely good or absolutely bad. Next slide. So 2021, next slide. So what was good in 2021? Next slide. So first thing, you know that we had the COVID shutdowns. Myself and some of the panelists have been discussing that, and the globe, the whole world was in lockdown, economic activities collapsed and all of that, which, as you study my slide, which started from 1961, it's a regular, recurrent activity in the world for the economy to suddenly go into a recession for different reasons. But for our recent one, it was COVID, healthcare, affected oil markets, affected global supply chains, affected manufacturing, affected virtually all sectors, and resulted in a global economic meltdown. But in 2021, we've experienced a gradual return of growth. So that's positive, right? And therefore, we can begin to expect things should get better. Next slide. And as the global economy has recovered, of particular concern to us in Nigeria is that global oil demand has bounced back, and we saw oil prices move, reaching over $80 per barrel in 2021. So that's positive as well. Next slide. And you can see these graphs. The last one, January to December, shows the recovery in oil prices in 2021. Next slide. And then COVID. The world is learning to live with COVID. The data may still scare some people, but you had the UK government make some announcements recently. The uneducated Nigerian has made their own decisions long ago. So you've seen some countries defy the global panic, like Sweden and so on. But anyway, generally, globally, Nigeria, people are beginning to adjust to COVID, realize that it will probably be with us, and therefore proceed with economic activities, which is good for the world. That's global. Next slide. That's Nigeria. The data does not suggest that we have a big COVID problem in Nigeria, but we don't know whether the data is correct or not. But certainly we are not picking dead bodies on the streets, and it doesn't seem like the average Nigerian has a crisis on their hands. So, next slide. We're learning, bottom line, we're learning to live with COVID, whether it exists, whether it's sustained or not. Then the gradual resumption of GDP growth. As you know, we've had 2 recessions in the last 6 years. Next slide. And this one, so you see the red patches. Those were 2 years in which our economy recorded negative growth. The 2016 one was oil market derived. The 2021 was because of the impact of COVID and the shutdowns on the oil sector. Next slide. And this is a quarterly breakdown of that same data. So you can see that for 5 quarters in 2015 and 16, we were in recession. And for 2 quarters in 2020, we were also in recession. But guess what? We've recovered. You can see that we're back to growth, even though the growth is not yet at a level that can be celebrated. The 5% and the 4% of the last 2 quarters look impressive, but economists talk about something called base effects. And so if you look at that Q1 against the Q1 of the previous year, you can understand that the base was very low, and therefore it was easy to have 5% growth or 4% growth in the last quarter, in the third quarter of 2021. So bottom line, if you look at the growth rate in between the 2 recessions, you see that we never reached 3% in any quarter. So if you take, why are Nigerians not feeling that the economy is good? They are not mistaken. If you start from Q4 2015 until Q2 last year, Nigeria has not had either been in recession or had economic growth below 3%, which is bad. So guess what? We're here as entrepreneurs and businessmen. The fact that the conditions look tough or bad or whatever do not mean we would fail. It will mean we'll be aware of the size of the challenge that we face. Next slide. But overall, it is positive that we're leaving recession behind and we're gradually beginning to grow again. This is, I won't bore you with this, but the bottom line, the information you take from this, the green bars are the non-oil sector and the red bars is the oil sector. And you can see that throughout the last 4 quarters, the green bar was positive. So our recent economic problems have been due to the red bars, as you can see, the oil sector, based on COVID, based on the global oil market situation, the production challenges Nigeria faces with oil. Nigeria's economy has suffered from that. But we can also rejoice that the non-oil sector has recovered significantly. Next slide. Next slide. So I spoke about the gradual return of growth. That's not just in relation to GDP as a whole. That GDP is the economy, the production of goods and services in the economy. It's also true in relation to many of the sectors that all of you do business in. So if you take this slide, you get a sense of sectoral growth as at the third quarter of 2021. That's the last available GDP data. And you can see that there's some real stars, finance and insurance. Many of you say these bankers. Okay, so I have the summary of that here. Finance and insurance, 23%. Transport, 20%. Trade, 11.9%. Information and communications, 9.6%. Health, 4.99%. Manufacturing, 4.29%. Construction, 4.1%. And real estate, 2.32%. This was not the picture just a little while ago. And I may show you some trends as we go along. Agriculture is also important to mention. the largest sector in our economy in terms of production of goods and services is just going by 1.2%. You might detect the impact of insecurity on agricultural production. Next slide. This is the structure of our economy. I just told you agriculture is the largest sector. You can see the largest bit of the pie. You can see manufacturing, crude petroleum and natural gas, construction, trade, information and communications, that's predominantly telecoms, and so on. So those are the largest economic sectors in the Nigerian economy. Many people will wonder, this man is saying crude petroleum and natural gas is only 5.77%. Yes, of the GDP, of the output of goods and services. But when you get to exports, it is most, as high sometimes as 93%. Certainly a minimum of 80% of our exports is oil and gas, crude oil and gas. And when you get to government revenue, and of course it's your exports that produce foreign currency, which is why we have the challenges we do when there's a problem with crude oil. And when you get to government revenue, because the oil sector is nationalized, NNPC on average takes 60% or so of every oil upstream joint venture, and therefore, when you get to government revenue, oil is typically like 75% or more of government revenue. So the challenges we have with oil markets is not because it is what most Nigerians are engaged in. It is because it is the source of our exports and foreign currency, the source of government revenue. Next slide. This is just some sectors. So you can understand the structure of your sectors and the economy in general. So this is our agriculture sector, and 91% of it is crop production. You may say that's an opportunity because it means that there's large crop production, there's insufficient fishing, there's insufficient livestock, there's insufficient forestry. We have opportunities to improve. Generally in the Nigerian economy, what you tend to see is that the areas of value addition, we are low in them. We are always big in the primary activity, putting seeds in the ground and bringing out the harvest. When it comes to the things that require processing, science, some investment, some methodology, such as ranching. Now, this is the information and communication sector. Telecoms, as you can see, is 82% of it. Broadcasting is 11%. Motion picture, sound is 7%. Publishing is 0.16%. The slide has rounded it up to 0%, but it's 0.16, which is insignificant. Finance and insurance. Financial institutions dominated by the banks and the pension companies. Insurance is 9% of it. Next slide. Manufacturing. So in Nigeria, the bulk of manufacturing, not surprisingly, given what we saw about crop production, is in relation to food, beverage, and tobacco. And between food, beverage, and tobacco, and cement, and textile, you have most of Nigerian manufacturing. Those largest three segments. I know that one of our panelists has something to do with textiles. That's this third segment, textile, apparel, and footwear. While food, beverage, and tobacco, of course, many of our manufacturers, Cadbury, Nestle, all of them, even the small ones, are engaged in food, beverages, and tobacco. And then, of course, Dangote, Boa, and Lafarge in that cement box. Next slide. This is the performance of agriculture, and it should send warnings to us as people who are interested in food security and to those who are in charge of policy. You can see the slope of the graph ending at 1.22 in the third quarter of 2022. Something certainly is wrong with agricultural production. Next slide. And this is information and communication. Essentially, Nigeria's best performing economic sector since the liberalization of the telecom sector and the digital mobile licenses that were issued. And you can see that even except for the short period of the real first recession, the sector has remained robust throughout. And that tells us something. So we are focused on where are the opportunities. That tells us that space around technology remains strong in spite of oil prices, in spite of recessions, in spite of Nigeria's economic difficulties. So you can see that, and this sector, information and communication, is dominated by the telecom sector, which has grown to become about 10% of the Nigerian economy from less than 1% in 2001 when we did the GSM, so-called GSM auctions. Next slide. Let me breeze through this. I don't want to take too much of data. You get the picture. Manufacturing is troubled. That's what this says. But it's doing some recovery. It's experiencing some recovery. If you focus on the last 3 slides. Next slide. Oil refining is more or less non-existent. You can see the long periods of decline in output. That's what that graph means. A persistent decline in output from our domestic oil refineries. Some say that picture will reverse once you have the Dangote refinery into that industry. Next slide. Financial institutions also a bit volatile, but towards the last quarter we saw that astronomical growth. Next slide. So as we're seeing these sectoral data, we can begin to reflect on what's good, what the trends are. This is insurance, a small sector, and also a bit troubled in terms of growth. Next slide. Construction has shown some modest recovery in the last few quarters. Next slide. Let's just move through the trade. Trade has suffered. Let's see trade, because that's important to Nigerians. Trade. You can see, go on to trade. Yes, you can see that this is a sector that has suffered. And why? FX challenges. Because that's what Nigerians use as the major input to trade. But you can begin to see that in the last 2 quarters there's been some modest recovery. There's also an element of a low base. So the growth we have seen may be significantly due to the fact that it has gotten so bad that it has bottomed out, and now we begin to see growth in trade. But the main inputs challenge in that trade sector, as you may not be surprised to note, is the FX supply challenges that we face in the economy. So let's now move on. I think I'll leave the sectoral data behind. Let's move on and go on to what else. Let's move on. For real estate, maybe I should talk about that. Show me that real estate. Because that has also been, real estate is the previous one. Yes. You can see that since the first recession, and there's an area possibly of opportunity, so I should talk about that. Since the first recession, the real estate sector experienced consistent negative growth and substantially negative growth. In some quarters, rising to as high as over 20% shrinkage in the value of real estate services and products in the market. Sometimes 9, 10. So this has been an industry characterized by oversupply, weak demand, and all of that. It gluts in many of the high-end markets and all of that. But you can see that we now have 4 quarters of modest growth in the real estate, which suggests, again, that the recession in that sector may be bottoming out and opportunities may be emerging again. Next slide. Let's move on. This is hotels and restaurants. Now, so what else was good? So some policy initiatives in 2021 that may be considered positive. One, the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act. Now that's controversial, but overall, we have to regard it as positive. In particular, the difficult question about deregulation of the downstream petroleum sector, otherwise called fuel subsidies, is now mandated by this law. Unfortunately, policymakers in Nigeria, in my view, have lost the opportunity to do this when it may have been convenient for our people, when oil prices were very low, in which deregulation may have resulted in no significant increases in fuel prices. Unfortunately, two things have now conjoined. Oil prices at $80, over $80 per barrel, and political cycle has started. The implication is that we may not see that deregulation, and therefore the opportunities, which I believe are immense, from deregulation of the downstream, may not happen soon, may be further deferred until it is convenient within the political cycle. But that must be mentioned as positive. We tried for 20 years to get petroleum reform, sector reform done. Now we've done it. The African Continental Free Trade Act came into operation in 2021. I say it's either an opportunity or a threat, depending on how the country responds to it. If we seize the moment, if we support and empower our businesses, it's an opportunity for continental expansion. And I think many of Nigeria's sectors are ready for continental expansion. Financial services, for instance. And many of our FMCGs and telcos and all of that may also be ready for continental. Even many of our professional services, consultants, lawyers, and all of that. So if we seize the opportunity, if our businesses and our policymakers seize the opportunity, the African Continental Free Trade Act may be an opportunity. In either, for whatever it's worth, the CBN introduced its own digital currency in 2021. So those may be the things that were positive. And in the seeds of all of those, you begin to see, is there an opportunity for me? All these sectors that are beginning to recover, real estate, construction, trade, all of those within the constraints in the economy, are they opportunities for me? Petroleum Industry Act, for those in the downstream oil and gas, certainly an opportunity to vastly increase volumes and the building of refineries and petrochemical plants and all of those initiatives within the sector, which will not happen in a price-regulated sectors. Now the opportunity is there by law. The question is, when will it become an opportunity in reality? When policy is able to respond to it and the political will is available in government, so we can tap into the opportunity. So that was what was good in 2021. What were the things which, so that I can be a bit diplomatic, I say were not so good? Next slide. Next slide. Inflation. And I'm sure, particularly, whenever I talk about inflation, I always see that the ladies in the room can always relate to me because they experience it firsthand. And inflation, one of the characteristics of inflation in 2021 was not just about Nigeria, although Nigeria was on a different level, and I'll show you the data. But inflation was a global phenomenon in 2021. Look at the data. US. Look at what the kind of inflation the US is used to, 0.something%, 1%. I mean, the Federal Reserve and many of the central banks in the West try to keep inflation close to zero. But look at where they ended in December, 6.6%. Beginning to resemble a third world Latin American country. Japan. Japan is one of the few who stayed within the realities of, but even in Japan, you see a move from 0.1, 0.2 to 0.6. In Germany, look at 5%. In Germany, Germans regard inflation as next to suicide. German policymakers. But guess what? 5%. And so on. UK, 4.6 in UK, 3.7 in Italy, China, all of those. So inflation, but like I said, Nigeria was on a different level because we're still significantly higher than these countries. Inflation is bad. There's no reason to accommodate high levels of inflation. What it does to the purchasing power, to the pockets in a poor economy, and what it does to producers of goods and services. Next slide. This is Nigeria's inflation behavior. So I said nothing is absolutely good and nothing is absolutely bad, as we tend to find in economics. So you find that the good news is that Nigerian inflation began to decelerate in the last few months of the year, but we can see that the trend was very negative. And in 15% is still very high inflation in a poor country with a large population in poverty. Next slide. These are some African countries, significant levels of inflation. Next slide. Of course, inflation is an African phenomenon. So when you come to Africa, Nigeria may not be as bad as some countries, but these are distressed economies, and we should never compare ourselves with this. Next slide. So inflation was bad. Currency was a problem, the naira, and the external sector generally, as you will see with my next series of. So we began to see, we've seen in the last few years, the naira get worse in regards to its valuation, and essentially even the levels where we all know, are held there by the central bank because of political risk management. So the currency continued to be under pressure in 2021. Next slide. External reserves are challenged. Of course, we know why. We now understand the cycle. And non-economists too do understand the cycle. When there are challenges with global growth, it causes global demand for oil to fall. When global demand for oil falls, it causes oil prices to fall. When the global oil prices fall, Nigeria's revenue from oil declines, which means our budgets get under problems and we borrow more, and currency becomes a problem as well because we have challenges with our foreign reserves. But the CBN did a tough job, a yeoman's job of trying to manage reserves. Let me move faster. I see somebody showing me. Let me see that thing again. What you showed. Wow. Okay. So I'll move on. The foreign trade dynamics were negative. Next slide. Essentially, we sell oil to all these countries and we import from China and India. That's how we run our external sector. Next slide. Foreign direct investment continued to decline. Of course, nobody invests in an economy in which there are multiple exchange rates. We've gotten slightly better, but it's still bad. There is insecurity, the policy environment is unclear, and there are perceptions of elevated levels of political risk. So foreign direct investment has been declining. Next slide. This is where foreign direct investment goes: banking, financing, trading. Next slide. Unemployment, the social sector is bad. So that's employment, that's poverty, that's misery, and the data is clear. The structure of the graph tells you that from 2010, unemployment has gone from, I can't see the presentation anymore, from 5% to 33%. and underemployment from 16% to 22.8%. So the social sector, people are poor, unemployed. Next slide. Debt fiscal scenario is getting worse. You can see the movement of debts. Next slide. Budget implementation in 2021 was weak because of revenue shortfalls. Next slide. And then there were significant policy gaps. So what was bad or not so good about policy? We'd never resolved the issue of fuel subsidies. The electricity sector reforms are basically stalled, and we're just stuck at the same level. We didn't leverage the opportunity of the oil sector crisis to reform our economy. We have not achieved exchange rate convergence, which is not a good thing. An economy should not have 2 or 3 exchange rates. We have increasing insecurity and increasing food insecurity. And now we have issues around lack of clarity over succession, which increases political risk. So next slide. So now, outlook, and I'll just try to take this as fast as I can. Budgets first. Next slide. So the budget for 2022 is 17 trillion. Immediately, total revenue is 10 trillion. So you can immediately see that there's a deficit of 7 trillion in the budget. And oil production target 1.88 million barrels per day. Budget says GDP will grow. That's government's own view about GDP growth in 2022. They say 4.2%. Next slide. This is the size of the budget in Naira. This is how it has grown. You can see we have achieved remarkable growth in the budget in Naira terms. When it comes to dollar terms, the growth is less remarkable, but there's still significant growth, especially in the last few years. Next slide. The problem with the budget is that it is financed by debt, and that trend is projected to continue in 2022. And you can see the allocation for debt servicing, which is like a quarter of the budget. Next slide. And you can see the sectors to which the bulk of the money, the moderator mentioned some of those sectors. So in terms of the capital expenditure, the Minister of Works and Housing, if you're a construction company that builds roads or that has a government contract for housing, Ministry of, what's this next one? I can't see. Agriculture, whatever. Anyway, so this is where spending is, with a remarkable number one in terms of capital being works and housing. Next slide. In terms of recurrent expenditure, Ministry of Defense, salaries and expenditure, financing the war on Boko Haram, and I think the moderator also mentioned defense contracts and Ministry of Education, all of those. So this is just salaries, overheads, and expenditure. The opportunities may be in some form of overhead contracts, and on the other side, the capital expenditure. Next slide. Let me just draw down. So you've seen where the opportunities are. Next slide. Now, growth. We saw that the government of Nigeria said GDP will grow by 4.2. That's the target in the budget. But what does the world, other sources think? Next slide. So this is Nigeria. This is the IMF view. And if I have to choose between what the IMF says about growth of the Nigerian economy and what the Nigerian government says, history suggests reality will be closer to the IMF figure rather than the Nigerian figure. So they're telling us the economy will grow in 2022 by 2.7%. I've seen projections ranging from 2.6 to 3% to 3.2%. So you know your range. The economy in this year will grow somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5%. Next slide. In terms of macros, oil prices, the fundamentals suggest they may continue to grow, but then there's geopolitics, which suggests that the U.S. policy towards oil prices may exert some pressure because the U.S. will be in an election, midterm election year, and fuel prices in the U.S. are becoming an election issue. So we have to watch in relation to oil market the tension between fundamentals, resumed global growth and demand for more oil, and geopolitics, we can have significant effects. Next slide. Let me just skip to the next slide. Go on. Policy issues to watch. Fuel subsidies. I think we've heard that the government has postponed that. This is the one I wanted. So real GDP, what do you expect in 2022? 2.7%. Inflation rate, a minimum of 13.3% average. Even though in the second half of the year, the pressure on inflation may get stronger, and we may have to review that as electioneering spending, which will present opportunities for some people, printing contracts, food supply contracts, logistics contracts, communication for those in the marketing communication, all of those things that happen around election season will present opportunities to people in marketing communications, in food, logistics, and all of that. The one a lot of people will be interested in, exchange rates. The CBN may be forced to accommodate some shifts in its official exchange rate, which may be moved to around 450. And we think that the parallel market will be much higher than that and may move to somewhere around or above 650. Next slide. Let me move on. Next one. Let me move to the opportunities. So what are the sectors to watch? The opportunities, continuing opportunities in agriculture, agribusiness, agri-tech, but they are now subject to the risks around security. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals, we've seen the resumption of growth in that sector. We've seen COVID bring investment and awareness concerning healthcare and pharmaceuticals. Real estate and construction, we showed you the data. You saw that it does seem, after 4 quarters of growth, there is sufficient basis to think that the sector may have bottomed out, and now opportunities for growth may be starting. Around the telecoms, IT space, it's clear that that's Nigeria's most resilient and most progressive economic sector. Food and beverages continues to provide opportunities. And then around fintech and payments and all of that space, there's significant opportunity. Next slide. I won't talk too much about this. This is scenario building. The bottom line is there are 3 possibilities for Nigeria, and it depends on the choices the government and the people make. 1, wavering. That's our mainstream scenario. We lie wavering, neither here nor there. There's a possibility of sustained expansion. Maybe that possibility has now been deferred till 2023, depending on the choices we make and depending on the options before us. But there's also a possibility of collapse. And because of all those risk factors that are present in the economy, if you want me to assign probabilities to them, wavering, as I said, is our mainstream scenario, is 50%. It's our default scenario. We just like to stay where we are. Sustained expansion is the minority scenario, 20% possibility. Collapse is a 30% possibility. In fact, it's larger than the sustained expansion scenario. And all the drivers are the factors that are put here. All of them you are familiar with. Policies, growth, the social context, policy around oil, PIA implementation, investment, foreign direct investment, local export, diversification, competitiveness. All of those factors will result. Next slide. Opportunity footprint in 2020. In addition to what I said about sectors to watch, continued recovery in non-oil sectors, vulnerability to continued recovery in non-oil sectors. The sectors finance, fintech and payments, trade, construction and real estate, software and ICT, anywhere that you can find and implement digital business models, including converting existing businesses into digital models, locally sourced manufacturing, healthcare and pharmaceuticals, entertainment. Of course, the benefits and promises of the new Petroleum Industry Act, when and if implemented. I've spoken about African Continental Free Trade Act, and of course, the global, regional, and domestic economy will continue to recover. Next slide. The risks on the other hand, monetary policies unorthodox, unpredictable, not strictly led by economic principles. But sometimes, the CBN is struggling. Vulnerability to disruptions in global activity, global oil markets, and global financial markets. Increasing fiscal risks around debts. You saw the graph. And the percentage of our resources that now go to servicing debts. Weak purchasing power due to continuous inflation, naira devaluation, and economic slowdown. Difficult policy choices around oil subsidies, electricity sector reforms, exchange rates, privatization, and infrastructure financing all present risks. And then there is now political risk in the context of 2023 transition, which is already raising temperatures. Next slide. I will not dwell on this political roadmap. Key thing to note is that it's certain to increase some element of political risk. Next slide. Next slide. Obviously, there are a lot of people who want to be president. Next slide. There are policy issues that are significant. The macroeconomic and fiscal environment, as you've seen, must be addressed. Disruptions to food production and security is impeding the opportunity in agriculture and is impeding food supply and is causing food inflation as well as food insecurity. Key macroeconomic indicators that must be addressed: low economic growth. 2-3% growth is not good enough for Nigeria. If our businesses must prosper, if our people must be employed and come out of poverty, we need the kind of growth around at a minimum of 6-7%, and possibly more if we aggressively reform the economy. Next slide. So I've managed to cover most of the ground. So for businesses, what I think businesses must focus on, all of those opportunities we've spoken about, and specifically, businesses must build, what we learned from COVID is that technology is critical, and businesses must build resilience. They must build capabilities in technology, in macroeconomic understanding, which is what we're doing this morning, in security management, because security has become a policy issue that managers must address: security of their business, of their workers, and of their assets. And then they must improve their understanding and awareness around strategy and execution. From the government point of view, serious and challenging policy choices in 2022 in relation to subsidies, electricity and gas prices, all of which are slated to go up if they are bold enough to do them in an election season. Exchange rates management and convergence of the rates, inflation, interest rates, and securing higher levels of GDP growth and security management. On the other hand, there is significant disgruntlement in the context of poverty and unemployment, and youths who have not yet forgotten the last SARS or end SARS protest. Next slide. Public expenditure, we think it will go up in an election season. States and the federal government will attempt to buy their way to retaining power. But in spite of all of the challenges we've identified, what you will note about the picture is that it is mixed, which is what life is really. there are significant opportunities in the context of significant risk. And that's what they say is when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. The role of entrepreneurs is to meander between the risks and find the opportunities. Thank you very much.
All eyes will be on knowing who the next president would be. But despite those challenges, we still believe strongly that there will be a lot of opportunities in the economy. Thank you so much, sir, for that presentation. Now we'll proceed to the plenary session, and I will start by introducing our panelists. All our panelists are very prominent people, and they have very long profiles. So you would permit me, I'm going to just read out the abridged version of their profile, just because of our time. And I'll be starting with Mrs. Adenike Ogunlesi. So Mrs. Adenike Ogunlesi is the founder and chief responsibility officer of Gatimo Group of Companies, parent company to one of the leading garment manufacturing companies, Gatimo Apparel, and Africa's foremost leading premium clothing brand, children clothing brand, that's Rough and Tumble. She is also an authority in the garment industry in Nigeria with over 35 years experience, driven by a passion to show the world the possibilities that abound in Nigeria. Rough and Tumble, founded by her, has grown to a company of global repute with over 300 dedicated employees, about 17 retail outlets across Nigeria. She is a non-executive director at Lafarge Holcim PLC, current president of the Garment and Accessories Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, and the founding member and first president of the Network Entrepreneurial Women at the Nigerian Employers Consultation Association, NECA. She is an advisory board member and mentor at WISCA, that's Women in Successful Careers, which is a structured mentoring program for young women. Mrs. Ogunlesi is an award-winning entrepreneur, a widely sought-after designer, a business leader, a public speaker, and philanthropist. She is happily married to Mr. Adegbola Ogunlesi, an industrialist in the beauty industry, and they are blessed with 3 grown children. Please, can we give her a warm welcome? Thank you. So the second person I'll be calling up on, he is virtual. That's Mr. Tosin Eniolorunda. Mr. Eniolorunda is the CEO of TeamHapt, Nigeria's largest agency banking operator. Mr. Eniolorunda started the company in 2015 after leaving InterSwitch and is now building the largest digital banking offering financial product tailored towards the needs of the underserved mass markets, focusing on micropayments, savings, lending, insurance, pensions. As at 2019, one of their products, MoneyPoint, had about 150,000 agents and have processed about 70 million transactions monthly with a value of about 3.5 billion naira and have about 14 million users. His company recently received a license to operate as a payment switch, providing enterprise solutions for banks in the country. TeamHapt has over 15 million customers and 100,000 businesses. Please, can we also welcome Mr. Eniolorunda, who is joining us virtually. I will also introduce our able moderator, Ms. Chinwe Egwim. Ms. Chinwe Egwim is the chief economist of Coronation Merchant Bank. She's an economist with over 500 published economic notes. She's a highly sought after thought leader and has spoken at and delivered keynotes on several reputable platforms. Her TED talk on equipping the female economy has contributed to conversation around lifting women. She's frequently pulled in to give expert advice around economic trends on new channels such as CNBC Africa and BBC. Her book, Understanding Economic Jargons, uses a simple approach to break down how economic indicators and investment climates react to economic shocks and upswing. It is ranked as the best seller on Amazon. Mrs. Egwin has served as an executive council member at Wimbies and the treasurer of Association of Professional Women Bankers and arm of the Chartered Institute of Bankers. Can we please also give her a warm welcome? And lastly, but not the least, is Mr. Sipram Orapo, who is here with us physically, and is the chairman of and CEO of Transerve Group. He's an astute businessman of international repute with over 30 years of practical experience in business. As is fondly called PCY, he graduated in 1989 from the University of Benin from the Department of Economics and Statistics. He attended the Chief Executive Program of the prestigious Lagos Business School and ICE Business School, Spain, and has attended many courses in management and entrepreneurship, both in Nigeria and abroad. He is a public speaker at local and international seminars and conferences, a life coach, and a counselor. He has won numerous awards, such as the Nigerian Medical Association Award of Excellence in recognition of his personal achievements, community development services, and contribution to the health sector. He is married with 4 kids. Please, let's also give him a warm welcome. So I will be handing over to Chinwe, who is going to moderate this session. And please note that if you have your questions, if you are online, you can drop your questions in the chat box. We'll take note of that. And if you physically present here, you can request for a piece of paper and we'll read out your questions. And you can please signify who you are directing the questions to. Thank you.
Hello?
Apologies for the technical glitch. Please just give us like a minute. It will be sorted. Okay, while we're trying to sort out the technical issue, so I would direct my first question to Mr. Okoyemi Agbaje. And the question goes thus: the economy has sustained growth in 2021, partly due to positive base effects. The improvement in global oil price and monetary and fiscal stimulus. Turning to the non-oil economy, how would you weigh the resilience of businesses within the non-oil sector, and what sectors are likely to perform well in 2022?
Thank you very much. Good question. The questioner, whether it's you or somebody else, is right. The broad reason, and I think I highlighted those. The 2 quarters of significant growth we have seen, second quarter and third quarter of 2021, should not mislead us that GDP growth is back in Nigeria. You saw the base, and we compute most economic data, including inflation, GDP growth, and all of that, from the base. And the base for Q2 2021 will be Q2 2020. And the base for Q3 2021 will be Q3 2020. And those were the heights of our recession. You saw that from our slides. So what we have seen and what we may see in Q4 when the data is out will be growth on the basis of base effects. After that, from this year, perhaps we may see more clearly whether we are actually performing well or not. As a matter of fact, in Q2, we had growth, because strong growth, 5%, because we were coming from a -6% base, but quarter-on-quarter growth was negative, which showed that actually we were not yet out of the woods. So now, to the direct question, of course, oil price recovery. Even in terms of oil price recovery, I always want to stress that because of our Nigerian unique way of managing our oil revenues, it's usually now both a blessing and a curse when oil prices go up. So it's a blessing because government receives more revenues into the federation account. It's a curse because the bill on the oil subsidy now continues to rise as oil prices rise. And therefore, in one pocket, we're happy. In the other pocket, we are confused whether we should be happy or sad. Now, the core of the question, however, how resilient are non-oil businesses? in Nigeria. I suspect the data suggests that they are quite resilient in the non-oil sectors. Fortunately, I talked through each of the sectors, the main ones. Agriculture should be robust in spite of oil prices. It is not dependent on oil prices. Unfortunately, the challenge to agricultural production now is no longer about resilience of the sector or whatever. It's about insecurity that is affecting agricultural output. So you have the North Central, which is our agricultural belt. You have the Northwest. You have the Northeast. Each of them is now challenged. And even increasingly, even in many segments in the South, there are challenges to agricultural production. So agriculture, the problem is not that the sector is not resilient. I have the belief that agriculture in Nigeria can easily grow at 5%. Unfortunately, the self-imposed constraints and the refusal to modernize agricultural practices has stalled growth in the sector. If you go outside agriculture, I spoke about telecoms and technology generally, and I'm happy there's somebody on the panel who will come from the fintech and technology space. Technology, as the data indicates, is resilient. It's not dependent on, it's dependent on human intellectual inputs rather than oil and gas prices or raw materials from manufacturing or imported inputs or whatever. So technology is resilient and it shows in the data. And I said that since we did the digital, the GSM in quotes auctions in 2001, it has been Nigeria's best performing economic sector, growing to become one of our principal sectors. Also, you've seen a lot of, and I can also say we have Mrs. Ogulesi here, the space around creative industry in Nigeria is resilient in spite of oil prices or GDP growth in other sectors. The fashion, the sports, the music, all of that space has also proven to be resilient. And where it is left to the private sector, such as fashion, such as music, such as film production, they have done well. Where it is controlled by government, such as sports, we have hobbled the sector and we're focused on the rents from NFA or Basketball Federation. So those have become part of the political booty. And therefore, they're not doing as well as those sectors could do if left in the private sector hands. Finance and insurance, healthcare, we're beginning to see movement on that front. Many of the non-economic sectors in Nigeria are resilient. Policy can support, especially in relation to the small and medium industries. But generally, as a rule, I would say our non-oil economic sectors are the real engine of growth of the Nigerian economy.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so I'll be directing my next question to Mrs. Adenike Ogunlesi. And based on our experience within the manufacturing sector, in terms of the manufacturing value chain, what are some of the challenges manufacturers are currently facing, and what are the strategies for mitigating these challenges?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me and having me here to share some of my thoughts on the way forward and the outlook for 2022. So if I look at my industry, which is the garment manufacturing industry, we have a lot of challenges that we're facing. Regardless those challenges, we are still forging ahead and talking to government about some of the things that we feel we can do very easily and very quickly. So the major challenges that we face begin with the availability of the correct quality of raw materials for us that we will use to manufacture clothing on a mass scale. So let me just make a small correction here. If you have 5 tailors, you're not a mass producer. If you have 100 tailors, 50 tailors, 100 machines, we can begin to say that you have the capacity to do mass production. So let me just put that out there. So when we're talking about the kind of fabrics and the quantities of fabrics that we need to do uniforms for, say, 1,000 schools, there is nobody in Nigeria who has the capabilities to produce the quality of fabric that we require to be able to do that. Or take, for example, white dress shirts. Men, there must be at least 1 million people a day. I don't have exact numbers, but from what I see, at least 1 million people a day that are wearing a white shirt, a blue shirt, whatever kind of a shirt. People going to work. There's no textile company in Nigeria that makes the correct quality of shirting material that we can use to produce those shirts. Now, you think just a simple shirt. Look at the number of people that are going to be employed because of one shirt. By the time you're making even 500,000 shirts a day, you're going to have somebody who's going to invest in buttons and making buttons locally. We don't have that. You're going to have somebody who's going to invest in the stay that goes into the collar of the shirts. We don't have that currently. You're going to have people who are going to invest in the right quality of thread. Because once you have those factors, what it means is that you're not only capable of producing for the local market, but you're now also capable of producing for the international market. So if you begin with West Africa, or you begin with AFTAC, with the African Trade and, remind me what the rest is. Yes, the African Trade and Alliance Agreement. You have the whole of I think it's a $2 or $3 trillion economy that you can produce shirts for. That is just one garment. You have the people who you are going to employ. And who are the people you are going to employ? You're going to employ machinists. You're going to employ machine technicians. You're going to employ electricians, plumbers, because there is a steam room where the shirts have to be steamed, ironed. There are industrial irons that you need to put in place to be able to do this. We actually have these machines in our facilities. Yeah? You're going to employ salespeople. You're going to be creating Nigerian brands. And this is what we want to see. Instead of you buying a TM Loewen shirt, can you buy a Nigerian shirt in a local brand? Everybody says, oh, but it will not be of good quality. Why will it not be of good quality? The reason is because we do not have the correct quality of raw material. But nonetheless, it is possible for us to do it. We also suffer from the fact that we have to bring in our raw materials, a lot of them from China. There's some things you cannot compete with. You cannot compete with the economies of scale that China has. So why can we not bring in those raw materials? And this is something we're trying to convince CBN, who is in charge of the cotton and textile industry, that look, let us bring in the raw material. In the short term, we will create jobs. In the long term, we can do a backward integration, and you will find people who will invest, because it then creates investment opportunities for people who want to go into the textile industry. What does it cost to revamp one of the mills? And let me not even go in that direction. Let me focus. Because if we go that way, the support the government has given the textile manufacturers in Nigeria over the past 20 years has been in the billions and billions of naira. And yet, we don't have this. So we need to also speak to ourselves with sincerity. You are not able to deliver my product. Own up. Let me be able to get the product so I can deploy people. I can create jobs. The pressing need for Nigeria in 2022 is the creation of jobs. For me, there's nothing more important than the creation of jobs. We have to create those jobs. So, raw materials, the finance to get the raw materials, the foreign exchange to be able to get the raw materials, inconsistencies in government policy that waver depending on who is in power or how the person in power feels, or the interests that the person in power has at that point in time, then determines the outcome of the policy that will govern the lives of millions and millions of people. And this also has to stop. This is another major challenge that we face. But within all of this, there are still huge opportunities in the garment manufacturing industry and in manufacturing in general in Nigeria, because we have to move from a rent-seeking economy, from a largely trading economy to a manufacturing economy, so that we can get people into employment. So what are the opportunities that exist? We recently formed an association of which I'm the president, and it's called the Garment and Apparel Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. We have presented CBN with the opportunities. The low-hanging fruits is the creation of employment. The next low-hanging fruit is the sheer size of the Nigerian market in itself. Us trading with each other, the way the Chinese trade within each other. It is a phenomenal, the size of the market is phenomenal. When you see Chinese people coming into Nigeria, guys, shine your eyes. It's the size of the market. It's not for the love of Nigeria. They don't care. It's the size of the market, the potential that exists within the market in this country. What are we, Nigerians, what are we doing about seizing those opportunities? What are the financial institutions doing about supporting industries with interest rates that will help us compete with Chinese people, for example? What is government doing about policy that will help us compete with the Chinese? That's another important message I would like to get across. I don't know who is online and who is listening, but I hope somebody in government is listening to what we're saying here. So, for me, what is important is this. When I look at Nigeria, I take a long-term view on Nigeria, and I decide the Nigeria that I want to see. Because the truth is, whatever you focus your energy on, you're going to get more of that thing that you're focusing your energy on. So I don't focus on a Nigeria that doesn't work. Like every other nation, Nigeria is going through its own growth, its own challenges with human capital, with politics, with economics, with everything. We are doing all of that. Within it all, there always arises a group of people that do well. And why? Because of the way they think, because of the things they focus on, and because of the things that they see. Are you going to be a Nigerian that is going to focus on all of the challenges and be pessimistic? Because you get more of that. Or are you going to be the Nigerian that sees, yes, we have challenges, but within a challenge, there's always, always, always an opportunity. Focus on the opportunity and see what you can achieve with that opportunity. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but somebody has to do the heavy lifting. And that's what we all have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. Thanks for that eye-opening and insightful response. So I would hand over to Chinwe to continue from here. I think we are good online now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Gunesi, for that response. And also to Abaji for the prior. The question did come from me, and I liked your response. But I have one more question on the back of your presentation. Given the outlook for GDP, inflation and exchange rates, as well as the potential for policy tightening by monetary authorities in advanced economies, what is your forward-thinking view on Nigeria's monetary policy rate? From Mr. Agbaje.
Well, I use the word unorthodox in characterizing Nigeria's monetary policy, maybe deliberately. And I said that our monetary policy tends to be creatively Nigerian rather than orthodox economic policy. Sometimes I understand why that happens. So for instance, Nigerians For instance, you may have constraints of policy around you, and you may be managing a negative basket of options. And typically, it seems that economic policy management in recent years has presented the central bank with a poor mix of options. And so I'm not arrogant in describing monetary policy as unorthodox, but certainly it is unorthodox. So for instance, if you have very low economic growth, one of your objectives should be stimulating economic growth and accommodative interest rate policy. And on the other hand, all of the logic suggests that we failed with the current approach of trying to control exchange rates. But then the political will to deal with floating exchange rates do not exist or does not exist. And that political will is not just in government. The popular sentiment often does not also favor floating exchanges. Secondly, in the context in which we're not really doing structural economic reforms, we're not reforming the economy aggressively, like we did between 2003 and maybe 2011, 12. We aggressively reformed the economy. We transformed our pension sector. We transformed our banking sector. We transformed our telecom sector. All of those transformations resulted in huge flow of investments and significant economic growth. That gave policymakers, for instance, the latitude to tinker with policy. But right now, there's not much going on in terms of economic reforms. And therefore, foreign direct investments are very low. So I would like to start the conversation from structural economic reforms, which is not the realm of the central bank, unfortunately. I would like to see reforms of sectors that are stalled. The electricity sector reform is stalled, more or less. And some will say failing. We've abandoned the potential for reform of the minerals and mining sector. Agricultural sector reform has been subverted by insecurity and, as I mentioned earlier, a refusal to modernize. All of those, in that context of absence of reforms, monetary policy is managing, let me use the same words I've used earlier, a bad basket of choices. So I'm sometimes forced to be sympathetic to those in charge of monetary policy. For instance, there was a time in Nigeria when Soludo was central bank governor, when all these reforms were going on. For quite a while, the central bank did not have to fund the FX market. There were autonomous flows of exports from investors, from all of that coming into the economy. Nigeria was number one in terms of foreign direct investment in Africa. Number one or number two every year. We track those data then. But now we are nowhere to be found in relation to foreign direct investment, which means the only source of FX into the Nigerian economy is the proceeds of oil sales. So that may not be a convenient period to, for instance, adopt floating exchange rates. If you float in the period in which there is a single supply which is dwindling, the rate goes to 1,000 naira to the dollar, and then political will fails. as it has just failed in relation to subsidies. So, Chiwe, my view is that monetary policy is unorthodox, is unconventional, sometimes wrong-headed, but if you place it within the context of overall economic policy and the absence of aggressive economic reforms and 3% GDP growth or 2-point-something% GDP growth or recessionary growth, maybe one would be forced to understand some of the limitations around monetary policy. Thank you very much.
A recent report highlighted the by in terms of human resources. Now, given the additional challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, what is the path to growth for SMEs? From Mr. Oracle.
Yeah, I just want to appreciate the leadership of this mission for this invitation. The question, if I understand the question you asked, it was about the financing of SMEs in a post-COVID period. Am I correct?
Well, during the post-COVID, because we're still in the...
I'm hardly hearing you. Maybe if you have the question, you can...
Can you hear me?
It's breaking. Well, if it is about financing, the challenges that SMEs face in raising funds is a typical thing which we all know in Nigeria, that banks in Nigeria don't finance greenfields. By greenfields, I mean startups, most especially when it concerns bricks and mortar companies like manufacturing. It's easy for them to finance fintech companies and so on. But if you are talking basically of SMEs in manufacturing in Nigeria, an average bank in Nigeria does not touch new projects. They will rather, in fact, there are some banks which I don't want to mention their names. They have it as a policy that they cannot finance greenfield companies. Okay, that you must have. They can finance your working capital. Okay, we had an experience 2 years ago when COVID broke out, that we wanted to manufacture face masks. Okay, so we went to a lot of banks looking for the financing, and then a particular bank, not really, they didn't really finance us because we had to put down over 100% of the funds as a cash collateral. Okay, before they can now finance, because you need bank to buy foreign exchange, okay, from the government. Okay, buying the FX from the parallel market was not feasible. Okay, so for banks to be able to buy this FX for you, you need to pass through them. So we had to place as a cash collateral over 100% of what we needed before they now give us a line. And then now, I even thank this bank for doing that. But immediately after we started and the volume, the sales and the proceeds start coming in, then some other banks that we approached that told us point blank that they don't finance startups or greenfields, They were knocking on our doors, almost breaking our doors. And I told them that I can't do business with you, because what you want is after the food is done, then you bring your plate for the food to be shared. Okay, so that's basically what many SMEs face in Nigeria. Banks don't do that. They would want your ongoing business to be able to finance the repayment of the facility for the first 1 year or 2 years. There are many good products that many local or many SMEs would want to go into. I have a product that I have been shopping for financing for the past 5 years. Product that we sell like pure water, that we pay back in 4 years. But not one bank was willing to support us till as I'm talking to you now, because it's totally a greenfield in industry. Okay, so banks, companies, SMEs, they face that peculiar problem in financing. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an interesting Thank you. So my question goes to Christian, who's online. Are we seeing signs of a permanent in consumer with respect to the pattern? And if yes, how can SMEs position themselves to stay at the top of consumers' priority list?
Hi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, yeah. A framework. Wow, okay. I don't know if the audience can hear me though.
I think you can proceed now.
All right, cool. All right, a framework to actually determine if your product will be changing over with time. There are two ways you should look at it. The first one is the needs, human needs, and the second one is how are these human needs, through what channel do people want to actually get these needs? Human needs are essentially, there's a psychological pyramid called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that essentially defines human needs in several pyramids. There are several segments. And essentially, it's divided into physiological needs, safety needs, belonging needs, esteem needs, and the last level being self-actualization. So at the lowest level are needs like food, shelter. These are like the primal needs everybody has. Then the next things are things like security, and the next things are things like, love, friendship. Now, every product that every business offers usually falls into one of these segments. For example, if you sell food or you sell beverages, you are the primal layer. If you're a movie theater, you are probably in the fourth or fifth layer. If you are Facebook, for example, selling relationships, you are in the third layer. Now, generally, the more prosperous people are, the higher they go off that pyramid, and the less prosperous they are, the lower they are in the pyramid. Now, as things evolve, let's say economic changes, growth or hardship, people go up and down the pyramid. Now, depending on the product that you're selling, you'll be able to know where you fall, and this will make you know, on a basis of need, how the demand for your product will look like. There's that thing about food, saying that food will always sell. That's because it's primal. So will shelter be. People always have a place to live. So will clothing. So will people having a need for connections. So depending on the business you do, you are going to fall into one of those segments. That's a way to evaluate your business as economic goes up or down, or prosperity goes up or down. Of course, some of the biggest industries today are usually in those primal layers, because they are always on needs. For example, Facebook is on the third layer. Google is on a layer that supports everybody on all layers. I run TeamApt. We are a payments facilitator. We're the largest merchant acquirer network today. Most of our point of sales are used for payments like cash in and cash out, and it's on a layer that's supporting everybody. So, for example, during COVID, we saw an increase in our own transactions. So that's a framework you can use. Now, the second framework you could use is the channel of consumption. The world is industrializing. The world is digitalizing rather, which means people are choosing more and more digital channels. You need to find a way to ensure that the channel through which you are selling your product also is evolving with time, which means you should digitalize your sales. Exactly, you should digitalize your sales. So whatever product you're offering on that hierarchy of needs, ensure that people can also begin to get it digitally. So to summarize what I'm saying, a framework you can use to think through your business, if people's priority will change, has to do with where in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs does it stay. The lower it stays, the better it is. The higher it stays, the worse for changing economic needs. But also generally, margins also matter, because your margins usually on the higher levels, are higher, because that is when things like articles of ostentation starts coming in that have ridiculous margins. But also on the primary layers, margins are lower. So you can use that framework to know how well your product will be under demand, depending on that. Then also the channel in which is consumed, and generally it just means that you should simply digitalize a little bit more. That is how I would preach to any business to evaluate their business. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that response. So what I hear from you is innovative thinking, but of course with that model or mechanism that you just shared. My next question goes to Mrs. Ogunlesi. Given the possibility of unforeseen challenges, the pandemic we're still from, how can businesses themselves against unplanned risk?
Sorry, I will try to just re-echo that. And the question is, given the possibility of unforeseen challenges such as COVID-19, how can businesses position themselves to hedge against unplanned risk?
What happened to us as a business? So in I forget which 20 it was, 2017 or 2018, there was a devaluation. And there was a global recession. And I remember everybody was saying it was only happening abroad. Nigeria was still doing very well. And this was one of the most deceptive things that we could have been telling ourselves. Because of course the outcome of that was that our currency was devalued. And then what was the implication of that for us as a business? And the devaluation was something like 30%, which meant that the current prices of the products that we had in all our stores could not replace the items that we currently had in our stores when we were going to produce a new set to bring through the stores. So it meant that we were going to have a problem somewhere. But because everything was going so well, we had also taken a 200-something million naira loan for an expansion project to roll out more stores. So we had this loan, we had the devaluation, and then of course you had this challenge with the prices where we now had to adjust our prices, which was a shock to the customer and the consumer. So of course there will be some kind of resistance from the consumer, because people will then look for alternatives, or they will buy cheaper wherever they can. Quality may then cease to be as important as it used to be, which is what we are known for. Quality and convenience and durability. Those are the three main things that we are known for as a business. So we had all of these things going on, and we also had manpower issues, the people element. So this was a real mixing pot of absolute chaos and confusion. But what I always say is that whatever direction a business takes begins with the outlook and the mindset of the leadership team. So the first thing was, okay, so this has happened. All right, why don't we retreat, get in a consultant to come and break down the meaning of this experience and how we're going to respond to it. So what we did was to look through our business to see what are the assets that we currently have that we can sweat, that we are not sweating enough. And out of that came the realization that we actually had a production facility that had a mono customer but had the potential for multiple customers. So let me explain what I mean. We have a garment manufacturing facility that manufactures for the brand Rough and Tumble. It has all these stores, it's selling online, so it's kept busy all the time. But it has potential, and extra capacity can be built into it so that it can now go into uniforms, school uniforms, security uniforms, medical apparel, and all these other things, including export of African-made clothing. So the best thing was to do the retreat, to see where we were, what we needed to do, and where it could potentially take us. Now, realizing that we had this asset, we now formed a totally different company called Gatimo Apparel Manufacturing. Took it away from under the existing company so that we could now give it a newly defined vision and mission and a new set of OKRs, objective and its key results and outcomes that we wanted from it. When we did that, we were actually getting ready for COVID, we didn't know. Because what happened from that outcome was we then took a trip to China, ordered machines that would help us increase our capacity. No bank, by the way, would give us the money, which they're famous for. All the Nigerian banks are famously for it. If they're famous for anything, that's not supporting greenfields, as you called it. And so we raised the money anyway, and we brought in these machines. Some of them got in before COVID, some of them way after COVID. But what did it do for us? It meant when they were talking about, I was hearing, oh, the airwaves are closed, the entire supply chain of the globe is disrupted. What do we need to do? Nobody is going to import masks from China. I have a factory here, we're going to make the masks. Is it cloth masks? We will make them. And so we made a 1-minute video that literally went viral. And from that, the most important thing for me were where were my staff mentally and emotionally? Where were they in their minds? And once I was able to speak to them, we were able to make the connection about what was possible. Everybody rose up, and before you knew it, we had rearranged the entire factory, and we were getting orders for masks, 100,000, 200,000, 10,000, 20,000, and our factory did not stop working through the entire COVID season. But if we had not done what we did in 2017 or whatever, we might not have been able to take as much of an advantage as we were able to take when things turned. So how do you build this into your business? I think the thing has gone red. That means I should stop talking. Is it? I don't know what the rules are actually. So let me just finish what I'm saying. I'm conscious of it as well. What then would have happened to us as a business? So what are you building into your business, into the leadership team of your business? Are they taking ownership? When they take ownership, do you allow? Are there key objectives? Are they clear? Is the ethos of your company clear? Your mission, your vision, your goals, what it is you want to achieve? Is the culture, what is acceptable in terms of behavior? Is it clear? Does everybody knows what is expected of them? Are people doing what is expected of them? People make a mistake and think that they're not a big business, so they don't have to do some things. If you are a business and you want to make money and you want to be successful, there's certain fundamental things that you have to put in place. But then the question to yourself is this: Are you building a business to pay your bills? Are you building a business that would outlive you? Because the way you would treat that business will be different. So I hope I've been able to answer the question with my comments. Yep, thank you.
Deborah, thank you for your reply. So my next question is to Mr. Oracle. How can businesses leverage technology across various sectors to maximize their productivity and even scale up their businesses?
If I understand your question, you ask how can businesses leverage on technology to increase their productivity, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Just like one of the panelists mentioned, that in the world of businesses today, if your business cannot be if it cannot be reached, let me use mobile phone, for example, okay? If people cannot contact you or transact business with you with the use of mobile phone or through the internet, then you may not be able to maximize the opportunities. And I have one story that helped us in my business. In Transserve, when we started in 2003 to manufacture disc, okay? Piracy was rife, okay? The greatest problem that content owners, the Nollywood players had was on piracy. And we thought through how can we use technology to drive our manufacturing process such that we can leverage on that. And we got a local firm, a local IT firm, to design an ERP application for us, such that when our customers bring their jobs and we register it, they will receive an alert that so and so job has been registered with us. And if anybody should bring a reprint order on that same title, once it hits our system, once we log it in, the content owner, the copyright owner will receive an automated alert that so and so order has been placed at Transserve. Did you authorize it? If we don't hear from you in 48 hours, we assume that you authorized it and we will produce the job. Okay, so that transformed the industry, that people who value protection of their intellectual properties, they routed all their jobs to us. That even when other factories didn't have order to produce, we had more than sufficient order because we tried to build in technology into our business operations, that whatever happens in the factory, in our production process, the content owner received several alerts. In fact, at a time, it will be such that when we introduce a new production input, you receive an alert that so and so quantity of your job has been produced. And then when we finally finish the production, you receive an alert that your job is ready for delivery. And when you make payment, you receive an alert that we've received your payment and that your job is already on the way to your warehouse. Okay, so you can leverage on the existing technologies. If you're a business person hearing me this afternoon, it will kind of push and distinguish your product or your business from every other product. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. So I have one question, and that question is to Wilson. So you are in the technology. Can you please advise and potential SME owners within your industry on how they can guard against cybersecurity issues, as this discourages market entry in this technology sector?
Thank you very much, Chinwe. I saw one of the responses on one of the charts that says my response was great and it was technical. So this time, I'll try to have a great response that is not as technical. So I'll start with a story. Cybersecurity is real. Sometimes, like last week or no, like 3 weeks ago, we noticed our traffic. We had some major extra load on our servers on one of our products, Monify. Monify is one of Nigeria's largest payment gateway, like Paystack and Flutterwave. And our technical guys were trying to fix it. What's this load? And I now saw that there was a message on Twitter for me. The person was saying that he was deliberately attacking our systems, and he said that he wanted some money because maybe he saw, maybe some vulnerability. Of course, our IT security team fixed the threat, and but not without having a downtime of about 1 hour. Now, first of all, I have a very large team. Like my engineering team is about 120 people. We employ about 300 technical people, and these guys are really expensive guys, and these are some of the best guys in the country. Many of them even get UK jobs straight from the company. So this is not a team that was not aware of what we're doing, but that didn't stop us from having like a 30 minutes to 1 hour downtime. And in IT time, that's like eternity. It can ruin your reputation. So we thought we fixed it. We went around and just go and check every other thing. We started a bug bounty program. So a bug bounty program is one where you pay researchers to say, if you find any vulnerability or any problem on my platform, I'll pay you some money. Maybe I'll pay you $10,000, depending on the severity. 2 days ago, the attack started on another one of our websites. The same person. Because the guy felt like maybe, we rejected him in the other one, and he just simply wanted to cause havoc. This time, he started on MoneyPoint. MoneyPoint processes about 80 billion every day in transactions value, worth about 4 million transactions for about 11 million customers. And that's like that's like a major part of the business. And it cost us to have a 2 to 3 hour period of reduced service, of poor service. We didn't go down to 30, of poor service. Eventually, our technical guys blocked it and fixed it and ensured that it won't come back again. But what I will now realize when I began to talk to some of my colleagues was this thing is actually very, very common, but you don't hear it. Attackers have seen a way to actually attack your system in a hope to extract ransom from you, because they know that if your business is worth something, they can go as bad as going into your network, encrypting all your data and keeping the key and telling you that you need to come and pay $500,000. Imagine a very large bank, something like that happening to them. They will pay a lot to get that. That's the equivalent of kidnapping human beings. They are called ransomwares. So this is a real life example of what people like us and my colleagues in the fintech or technology space are facing. It is real. Now, the good news is you'll probably not get this until maybe the business is beginning to worth it, because they feel like, how much will it be worth your time? But then again, some of them might just be really unscrupulous and just want to do it for fun, not because they even want money. So every small business, not even just every small business that has IT needs to be very, very conscious. There you go. Needs to be very, very conscious of the fact that it's similar to having a house, a beautiful house. Thieves want to go inside. It's the same thing in the IT world. The moment you have an infrastructure that is producing something, thieves also want to come inside. And the ways small businesses can build this, fix this, is by actually deploying. There are several mitigation techniques. I don't think I can explain it here because they're a bit technical. It's similar to the way you put up security around your house by having a gate. There's an equivalent of a gate in the IT world. It's called a WAF, Web Application Firewall. It's a wall you put it around it. Probably not for this meeting, but we can take this away that if you have a business that has IT, have it in mind that thieves want to come inside. I need to take active steps to ensure that you are protected, and there are several techniques around that. And there are good people around you that can also help you build it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response and being honest as well, because not everyone would be comfortable enough to share. Thank you so much for that. Now, before I hand over to Ayo, I just want to thank every member of my panel. They did release insightful nuggets. I hope the participants received enough nuggets as much as I did. It's interesting, the panel does the green shoots of the economy, at least the sectors that have posted growth over the past 8 quarters, the manufacturing, and also so it was really good to get your insights on and understand sectoral trend. So I'm going to hand Ayo right now. I'm going to anchor the Q&A.
Okay, thank you so much, Chinwe. Thanks for those insightful questions. So we have a very, very active participants, and we have loads of questions here. But what I've tried to do, because of our time, I'm going to batch them. And I'll be starting with Mr. Okpeyemi. For most of the questions, they are targeted towards different sectors. And I will try to highlight those sectors. And most of them are also trying to look out for financing opportunities. So for instance, in the education sector, when you spoke about the budget, but they are spending significant amount for that sector. But what are those opportunities that can be drawn from that, as well as the opportunity for financing? Regarding the manufacturing sector, also financing is also very key. And what are those opportunities that can be garnered from that particular sector? We also have a lot of questions around the agriculture sector, which we know CBN has been doing a lot of intervention funding. So what are the other opportunities that you feel for businesses within that space that they can access funding? And lastly, on the creative sector, that despite the intervention funds, the funding is still insufficient within that space. And what do you think is the way out? And now this is, you can wrap up with this. What the focus is that we've been seeing a lot of data, economic data, but necessarily, most times those data necessarily does not translate into the pockets of Nigerians. So you spoke about economic growth rates, very impressive, but as a nation, when you look at the cost of living, it's really very high, and a lot of Nigerians are below the poverty level. So what do you think we can do regarding that? And sir, if it's possible, we can be brief so that we can be able to take more questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start with the last question, data. Actually, all the data that I spoke about today reflects the reality. High inflation, high poverty and unemployment, high interest rates. So, and even in terms of GDP, the data tells you that the GDP growth is low. So that question appears to me to stem from a preconception about economic data in Nigeria. The preconception itself may be correct, but the data that we have discussed today do not suggest that the picture is rosy. The data suggests that we are passing through tough times, We are growing in the last 2 quarters because of a low base. Many sectors are still not doing well. Agricultural sector is growing only by 1%. And even many of the other sectors are still benefiting from a low base. So, in terms of what can we do to improve the well-being of Nigerians, which I think is the focus of the real focus of the question. I think one, we need growth. Like I said, we need a minimum 6 to 7% GDP growth, and we're not having that, and we have not had that for 6-7 years, and therefore people are entitled to feel a lot of misery. In a low growth environment with the level of infrastructure we have and the poverty we have and the unemployment we have, things will get very bad. So we need higher growth. And how do we get higher growth? We need investment. It's because investment is no longer happening in the Nigerian economy. And I showed the data in relation to foreign direct investment. Even local investment is suffering. So we need investment. And what will we do to stimulate investment? Improve exchange rates, harmonize exchange rates, improve the business climate, improve security, embrace aggressive economic reforms. That's why I spoke to those issues. Now, in terms of the funding issues generally, let me say that our market for funding is shallow. That's the reality. So, for instance, people say the banks don't finance greenfield. But often, even in advanced economies, it's not deposit money banks that finance greenfield manufacturing. There's a lot of venture capital. There's a lot of investment capital. There's a lot of access to all sorts of development finance, all of those things. So sometimes our expectation of the deposit money banks, otherwise called commercial banks, does not fit their purpose. Except that unfortunately for us, those things that should finance these things we need are not available in sufficient quantity in our economy. So we have 1 or 2, 3, 4, we have insufficient private equity. We have insufficient investment capital. We have insufficient development finance. Many of the development finance institutions are troubled. Maybe only one, BOI, is really making some impact. All of those constraints, our pension fund market, we've not yet created vehicles to translate pension funds into infrastructure financing, mortgage financing, and all of those things. So the challenge is actually for the financial sector and for people, I see some in the room who understand long-term finance, to create more and more vehicles. Now we have a large pool of pension funds. And I guess the pension commission and the pension industry also has a role to play in that. How do we translate those funds that we have accumulated under pension funds into vehicles for financing infrastructure, for financing industry, for financing mortgages, for creating venture capital funds, and all of those things? Those are the real solutions I suspect, and that applies across the range, whether it's creative industry or agriculture or manufacturing. Now, in relation to agriculture, I have found that the real opportunities in agriculture these days, especially compounded by the insecurity, is not necessarily in crop production, but in agricultural processing. And therefore, I would advise people to focus more in those sectors in which output is stable and large enough. Focus more on the opportunities in processing and manufacturing, food and beverages, and all of those things. Of course, also explore the CBN, BOI, and other intervention funds. For manufacturing opportunities, I have 2 rules of thumb, or maybe it's just one. Manufacture as much as possible. given Nigeria's constraints with foreign currency, look for manufacturing with predominantly local inputs. And my rule of thumb is that if the inputs, the foreign component, the FX component of the inputs exceed 25%, be very careful. Because that means you will be perpetually under pressure to find foreign currency, which is not available. The other thing I say to Nigerian manufacturers, and I know it's easier said than done, and this is not even manufacturers alone, even service industries, even people like us, I've made that a strategic imperative in my own firm. Look for dollar income. So can you export? Can we do training online? Today now is a global world. Can I do training for audiences in America? Even if I charge them $100 per person, if I can get 200 people, that's significant, etc. So let's change our mindset. I told you in GDP terms, only oil and gas accounts for only about 6% of what is produced in Nigeria. But when it comes to exports, it's over 90%. That tells us that Nigerian business does not have a mindset towards dollar income. And we have to seek it aggressively in all our businesses. I think that may be sufficient for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Then we have also, Mr. Opeyemi, we've also received a lot of requests regarding your slides. Please, are we free to share the slides with the participants?
I will give you a PDF version of my presentation, which you can share with everybody.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah. So now, the next set of questions are for Mrs. Ogunlesi. For most of the questions are not really very similar, so we may not be able to take all, but I've tried to summarize some of them so that we can take for this. Then we may send some of those questions to you for us to get the feedback and respond to the audience. So the first question is that, yes, you highlighted that we have the challenges of raw materials. Is it not possible to leverage the use of Ankara to bridge that gap? Secondly, as a major player within the textile industry and also as part of the association members, is there a way you can revive one of the textile mills and you concession? It can be a concession arrangement such that it would help bridge that production gap that we have in Nigeria. Someone also asked that, is there an association for toiletries and diapers in toiletries, an association, the Manufacturers Association for production of toiletries and diapers? And what are the major challenges within that sector? Also on pricing, that in the 1980s, we used to have what we call the Marketing and Price Regulatory Board within the manufacturer space. That beyond the ability to produce, is there any body that regulates prices within that within the manufacturing sector or the textile sector? And I think lastly, this person is asking, is a manufacturer that supplies to distributors and not directly to customers. Is there a way to use technology to drive this business? Thank you.
Okay, so the last question, can you repeat it? Technology to drive B2B or B2C?
B2B.
There's nothing that technology cannot drive in the 21st century. Again, what are you using? I think you gave an excellent example, actually, about that. Your company using an ERP to process people's orders, so you're able to better manage the customers. So I think the person should have listened very carefully to you, and they would have got they would have got a clear answer from you. But from my perspective, there is no business today that does not sit on technology. The six or seven pillars of our business is driven by technology, from product development to customer service to human capital management, the people, to the finances, to the systems and processes that drive the ecosystem, to the community, which is what we are able to share and give back to the communities where we earn from. Technology is the backbone of every single industry of the 21st century. So you have to find a way to use technology to speak to your B2B customers. So you have Instagram, you have creating a website, you have all the tools, TikTok, you have Facebook, you have creating a website, you have using influencers to talk about your products, so that more people can get to understand what it is that you're doing. I think the range of tools that are available to you to use to promote your business is incredible, and it's one of the greatest advantages of the 21st century, that you don't actually even need an advertising agency. The advertising agencies, even their existence is being questioned at this point in time, because there's so many people who are not from that background who are able to manipulate technology to get to their customers, and they're doing fantastic business. So I think you can use technology, all those things. About a pricing board, I really don't know much about that, so I'm not going to answer that question. But I'm sure that I learned something very earlier on in my life. Google is your friend. You can Google it, and you might be able to find some kind of information regards that you can use. Or you can find out from the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Okay, and Mr. Agbaje says he will help with that. So when I'm done, I'll let him share some information on that. Toiletries and diapers, please go to the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. I'm not in the toiletries and diapers business, so I don't really know much about that industry. But I think from the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, you'll be shocked. Okay, oh my goodness. The amount of support I have both on my left and my right is incredible. When you speak up, answers and solutions tend to turn up. So concession, the unfortunate thing is that people mistake made in Nigeria and available in the Nigerian market as made in Nigeria. What do I mean? Because Ankara is available in the local market does not mean that it is produced in Nigeria. There are containers of Ankara coming straight from China. 95% of the Ankara that you are wearing is coming from China. 95% of the Ankara that is sold in Balogun goes first to Cotonou. This is the honest truth. So let's not be confused. Goes first to Cotonou and then comes into Nigeria across the border. There are huge merchants in Cotonou who order directly from China. So again, there has to be the political will. This is above somebody wanting to invest. There has to be the political will and the sincerity of intention from the side of the policy makers, saying we are going to support this business, this industry in a new way, because they have been doing the same thing for the past 20 or 30 years. And these industries went from 200 industries to less than 20 in Nigeria today. And they were the biggest employers of labor. But if I look across the room and I say, how many people are wearing something that was made in Nigeria? Please put your hands up. How do you expect the textile mill to work when you are not wearing made in Nigeria? How? as helpful as both gentlemen beside me are, neither of them are wearing anything that is made in Nigeria. No disrespect meant to you guys. No, I am, this is Adire, this is made in Nigeria. The fabric is not made in Nigeria, but the tailoring, the idea, it is still creating jobs. It's better than where your suit is made, where the jobs are created in another country. Let's create the jobs locally. That's what we're saying. Yeah? So there's a lot that goes into that. There are easier ways. There's digital printing where you get a machine, but then the challenge is the dyes. The dyes are not locally made. So there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of work that needs to frame those opportunities into easily accessible opportunities. Whether easy is the correct word, I don't know. But into opportunity, into becoming jobs, into becoming opportunities that are creating jobs. There's still a lot of work that we need to do in that space. I've already answered the question about Ankara. A lot of the Ankara in the open market, unfortunately, is not made in Nigeria. A lot of the Ankara that is made in Nigeria has a lot more polyester content in it and a lot less cotton, because it is cheaper for them to increase the polyester content and reduce the cotton content. So nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody wants to wear it, but discerning people who have the buying power don't want to buy that. So the textile industry also has to understand that there is a new Nigerian who wants quality and is willing to pay for quality. There are fashion designers in Nigeria who are selling clothes for 1 million naira, one outfit for 1 million naira. It's happening. They're creating a whole new market as a whole different segment of the market that we can take care of. So we really need to do something. Let me hand over to you so that you can.
I just wanted to talk about the gentleman or lady who asked about price control boards. And the subtext or the assumption underlying that question is that that is a good thing. And I wanted to challenge or correct or dispute that assumption. We had price control boards in the 70s, and they fixed prices for commodities. For instance, they fixed the price for Coca-Cola bottles. And they said a bottle of Coke should sell for 10 naira. And they went to compute the cost of inputs into a bottle of Coca-Cola and concluded that the production cost should be 8 kobo. And then, let me say 8 naira. And then the price should be 10 naira. The manufacturer should be able to survive on 2 naira profit. You know, and so they went to the end, the retailer. They arrested my mother for selling Coke at maybe 15 naira instead of 10 naira. And I saw them taking her away when I was a small boy, until one of them looked at us children crying and said, "Oh yeah, madam, we're going back." And my mother bought the Coke or the Pepsi from the Pepsi truck for more than the retail price that they said we should be selling it at. So price control does not work, is misconceived. The market will determine the price of products. The problem is that we should develop the elements in that market value chain. That's what we should focus on. So she's speaking about textile mills. You can't fix the price of textile if you don't have good textile mills. Focus on the inputs, cotton farming. Make sure there are quality controls. If you want to control quality, inputs, all of that, through SON, standards regulation, NAFDAC for food, do all of that. But to try to control prices in an economy in which you don't have control over the input cost, if there was a price control agency now, it would assume that the dollar cost is the CBN 411 naira or whatever the CBN tells it. Meanwhile, that producer has produced it at 500 and something, which is the rate at which he could access dollar. So they will now tell the retailer we must sell at this price, which is what happened to our mom in those days. So it doesn't work, and it is not desirable. It is better to focus on your or the controllable elements, inputs, business climate, all of those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you had asked a question on the challenges that diapers and sanitary pads that they face locally. There are basically two challenges. Okay, and I got to know about this in the course of manufacturing face mask. Okay, because the surgical mask use the same basic raw materials that diapers and sanitary pads use. And what is that challenge? The non-woven fabric. Okay, the basic raw material for sanitary pads, diapers, and surgical mask is non-woven fabric. Now, this non-woven fabric is not manufactured anywhere in Nigeria. It has to be imported from China. Okay, so you need to import it and then turn it into finished product. That's one. The second problem that the sanitary pad and diapers have in Nigeria is from the multinationals, all these big sanitary pad and diapers manufacturers. I don't want to mention their names, but I understand that presently now they are more of traders than manufacturers. Okay, so they have a semblance of a manufacturing outfit locally, okay, but they import probably 80% of these finished products into Nigeria. So local Nigerian companies that manufacture diapers and sanitary pads, they found it difficult to compete with them, okay, because they had to import the inputs and then turn it into finished goods. But these big people, they are quite big. They lobby. In fact, they have frustrated every attempt of the industry to seek for a solution from National Assembly. Okay, so these big, they meet governors' wives. Okay, they go and introduce a pet project to a governor's wife about supporting schools, secondary schools with diapers and sanitary pads, you know, so they cover, so I don't know, but it's a whole lot political stuff that they're doing there. Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been a lot of points that we've noted. There are really a lot of nuggets that we've been able to derive from all these discussions. And we believe that we've been able to meet the expectation of our audience based on a lot of the insights that have been shared across the various sectors, different ideas, and also the opportunities within that particular space. And we would like to bring the plenary session to a close. And we want to thank you for your time, for taking time out, and also to be able to give us some of those ideas that will help us to run in 2022. Starting with Mr. Okoyemi Agbaje, the CEO of RTC Advisory Services. Thank you. Also, Mrs. Adenike Ogunlesi, the CRO, Rough and Tumble. Thank you so much, ma. Mr. Cyprian Orapo, the CEO, Transverse Group. We appreciate your time. And Mr. Tosin Enioluwada, the founder and CEO of Tempt APT. Thank you. And lastly, Miss Chinwe Egwin, thanks for your time, the Chief Economics, Coronation Merchant Bank. So thank you, everyone.